Eleanor Roosevelt. We all know the name, right? Instantly think First Lady.
Mm-hmm.
But what if the sources we're digging into today show something, well, much deeper?
Yeah, they really paint her as this force of nature, a relentless advocate for justice.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it, if maybe her life wasn't just this simple path of privilege everyone assumes. These materials definitely hint at some underlying challenges, big ones, actually.
Absolutely, and that's what's so interesting about this deep dive. We're not just, ticking off biographical points.
Right.
We're really trying to trace those foundational things, especially in her early life, her family.
Mm-hmm.
What forged the Eleanor Roosevelt we remember. We might uncover some surprising stuff about where her impact came from.
Totally. So for everyone tuning in, this isn't your standard history lesson. We want to give you a real feel for the forces that actually molded Eleanor.
Yeah, get under the surface a bit.
We've got some really insightful excerpts here focusing right on those formative years, her family background, and it provides a much richer picture than just like a list of her achievements.
It really does. Okay, so should we jump in?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's dig in.
Okay, so the sources, right away, they place her firmly in, American high society. Born in Manhattan, 1884.
Mm-hmm.
And her family tree is pretty impressive. A Roosevelt on her bad side, Theodore's niece, actually.
Wow, TR's niece.
And a Livingston through her mother. But almost immediately, the text points out this really stark contrast.
What's that?
Well, this very privileged background, but alongside really significant emotional turbulence right from the start.
Right, yeah. The source material doesn't pull any punches about her home life being tough. Her father, Elliot Roosevelt.
Theodore's brother.
Yeah, Theodore's brother. He apparently really struggled. Alcoholism, mental health stuff meant he was gone a lot.
Mm-hmm. Frequent absences.
And her mother, Anna, sounds like she's pretty critical.
Yeah.
Emotionally distant, maybe?
That's what the sources suggest. That nickname, Granny, for a young girl.
Oh, wow. Granny.
Yeah. I mean, you can only imagine the impact that kind of thing has on a kid's self-esteem.
Oof, yeah. It really shows how that outward appearance of wealth, it just doesn't tell the whole story, does it?
Not at all. It's a powerful reminder, really. But what's interesting here, the text also mentions these glimpses of real warmth amidst the instability.
Like what?
Well, her father apparently called her his little golden girl, and they say he instilled a sense of compassion in her.
Ah, okay.
So these small moments of affection from him, they probably felt incredibly important, like little anchors for her.
Yeah, you could see how that early exposure, the ups and downs, might fuel that lifelong drive to help people who are vulnerable.
Exactly. It plants a seed. But then comes just devastating loss.
Yeah, this part is tough. By the time she was 10, she'd lost both her parents.
Both. Her mother died when Eleanor was only 8.
8 years old.
And her father wasn't long after that. It's hard to really grasp the impact of that kind of loss so young.
Unimaginable.
And the text really emphasizes how this led to the family being split up. The siblings separated.
Right, the brothers went somewhere else.
Yeah, they went to live with their mother's relatives. But Eleanor, she was sent to her grandmother Hall's mansion on Fifth Avenue.
Okay, so materially stable, I guess. But emotionally.
Well, that seems to be the key. It seems like it just amplified her sense of being alone. The way the sources describe Grandmother Hall's house. Very Victorian, rigid, all about propriety, not emotion.
That's cold.
It really does. It reinforces this feeling of emotional sterility. You almost feel the chill just reading about it.
Yeah, I get that. And in that kind of atmosphere, it's not really surprising that young Eleanor started developing ways to cope, right?
Survival skills, really.
Turning to books, becoming super observant of everything around her, learning how to hide her pain.
Masking it, yeah. And these skills, in a way, they laid the groundwork for some of her later strengths, didn't they?
Definitely. And that self-discipline she developed,
Yeah.
that clearly stuck with her whole life.
Absolutely. These early years were just so formative. Now, the text also digs into the wider family influences, starting with Uncle Theodore.
TR again? The president?
Yep. He wasn't always around, obviously, but he was this huge symbol of public service, that famous Roosevelt energy,
Speak softly.
and carry a big stick.
Right. The sources suggest he offered this model, maybe, of how someone with privilege could use it for something bigger.
Even though her style ended up being pretty different.
Very different, yeah. More collaborative. But his example, it probably planted a seed, like you said.
Okay. And then there were the Hall relatives, her mother's side.
Right. And it sounds like they weren't exactly a bastion of support. The focus seemed to be all on social standing, physical beauty.
Oh, dear.
And apparently there was frequent criticism of Eleanor's appearance, her demeanor. That must have just poured salt in the wound,
Yeah.
given her insecurities.
Yeah.
It's like born into this fancy world, but feeling like the awkward one out.
It really highlights how damaging those societal expectations can be, especially for young women then.
For sure.
But the text also mentions some positive connections, too. Her relationships with her younger brothers, Elliot Jr. and Hall.
Even though they were separated.
Yeah, even after their parents died. It shows this early nurturing side to her, a sense of responsibility for them.
Foreshadowing, maybe. Her later work caring for others.
You could definitely see it that way. It hints at that widespread commitment she had later on.
And then there's her cousin, Alice Roosevelt, TR's daughter.
Alice. Yes. What a contrast in personalities.
Totally. Alice was apparently super vivacious, confident.
Well, Eleanor was more, introspective, quiet.
It sounds like their relationship, maybe a bit competitive sometimes, but it actually kind of pushed Eleanor to figure out who she was.
Exactly. To define herself against Alice, in a way. Not just be who the family expected.
Interesting. So all these family dynamics, the good and the bad.
They all played a huge part in shaping her sense of self. But maybe the biggest influence, as the source really stresses, was just the absence of that stable parent-child bond.
That early loss.
Yeah. It created this lifelong yearning, it seems, for real connection, for acceptance. And this, the text argues pretty powerfully, became a core driver behind her incredible empathy for people who were vulnerable.
That quote they include, "I know what it's like to be lonely and afraid."
Chilling, isn't it? It just perfectly captures where that deep compassion came from.
It really does. It makes so much sense when you think about her later work, fighting for people on the margins. Okay, so let's shift to her education. It started out pretty standard for her class, right?
Very standard. Private tutors at Grandma's house. Focus on, etiquette, French, music, the expected things.
Sounds maybe not super intellectually stimulating.
Probably not, no. And the source clearly points to her time at Allenswood Academy near London when she was 15 as a massive turning point.
Yes, Allenswood.
And specifically, the headmistress there, Marie Souvestre, her influence sounds absolutely crucial.
How so?
Well, here was someone who actually saw Eleanor's intellect, her character, engaged her in real serious conversations, gave her challenging things to read, pushed her to think for herself.
That sounds pretty revolutionary for a girls' education back then.
It really was. It wasn't just about book learning. It was about building confidence in her own mind. That was foundational for everything that came later.
You can see how that would be huge. It sounds like Allenswood was where she really had this intellectual awakening.
Totally. Became fluent in French, developed a real love of literature, and finally felt valued for her mind, after years of feeling judged for how she looked.
Must have been incredibly freeing. There's that quote from her about Mademoiselle Souvestre, right? Something about being shocked into thinking.
Yeah, shocked one into thinking, and that, on the whole, was very beneficial. It says it all, really.
It really does. It gave her that intellectual foundation, that self-assurance she'd need later.
Absolutely crucial, but then, boom, that stimulating world gets cut short.
Her grandmother calls her back.
Yep. Insisted she return to New York in 1902 for her formal social debut. Talk about a jarring shift.
Oh, man. From deep intellectual engagement to, well, the debutante scene.
Right. Back to that often superficial world of being evaluated socially, the source says she felt kind of empty, even intimidated by it all.
You can almost feel the disappointment. But what's interesting is she didn't just sort of go along with it passively, did she?
No, she didn't. She found ways to push back against those expectations.
Like volunteering with the Junior League.
Exactly. And teaching immigrant kids on the Lower East Side, that's a world away from ballroom parties.
Wow. Talk about early social work.
And that exposure firsthand to urban poverty, tough working conditions, it really broadened her understanding of inequality, planted those seeds for her lifelong commitment to social justice.
Definitely. So even though she might have felt awkward in high society, she was already finding her own path.
Yeah, and developing a certain confidence, even if she was uncomfortable with the superficial side of it.
Which kind of leads us to her meeting Franklin, right? In 1903.
It does, and the source points out that he was drawn to her depth, her sincerity, which, again, is kind of a contrast to what was often valued in their circle.
But the engagement wasn't exactly smooth sailing, was it? Franklin's mother, Sarah Eleanor Roosevelt, she had issues.
That's right. There was definite disapproval from Sarah initially, so another hurdle for Eleanor, even as she's finding love.
So when she gets married in 1905, it's with this whole mixed bag of hope, but also maybe some fear, given her own childhood.
Understandably, yeah. Loss, judgment. It was always a lot. That quote, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent."
Yeah, that one really hits home here.
It speaks volumes about the resilience she'd already built up, despite everything. This whole journey of resilience, it didn't break her. It seemed to forge this incredible inner strength, didn't it? And that deep empathy we keep talking about.
It's such a clear thread, isn't it? That resilience, those tough early years, they didn't crush her spirit. They seemed to build it, build that empathy.
Precisely. And as we look at her early marriage, the source notes that, okay, initially she followed the conventions, right? Having kids, managing the households, supporting Franklin's early political stuff.
The expected role?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But even then, there were apparently hints of her own independent thinking, her getting involved in social reform movements already.
But then comes what the source really calls out as a major turning point.
Yes. The discovery of Franklin's affair with Lucy Mercer in 1918.
That must have just rocked their world. A seismic event.
Absolutely. Shattered any sort of romantic ideal she might have still held on to.
Yeah.
But the source makes this really sharp point. Paradoxically, it also strengthened her independence. In big ways.
How so?
The whole dynamic of their relationship fundamentally shifted after that. It wasn't the same.
And from that point, she really started carving out her own identity more publicly, didn't she?
Mm-hmm. Developing her own voice, politically, publicly, getting involved with women's groups, becoming more active in the Democratic Party.
She wasn't just Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt anymore.
Not at all. And then, another huge crisis hits.
Franklin's polio diagnosis. 1921. Devastating.
Truly devastating. And the source really highlights how Eleanor just stepped up, became his eyes and ears in ways that were just incredible.
Traveling for him? Speaking for him?
Yeah, and expanding her own political skills massively. Her public presence just ballooned. She got really good at persuasive speaking, at judging political situations independently, navigating that whole male-dominated political scene.
It's fascinating how those earlier experiences, even the tough ones, kind of prepared her for this moment.
You can really see the connection. So by the time Franklin actually becomes president in 1932, Eleanor is way more than just a supportive wife.
She's a force in her own right.
Exactly. She'd truly become, well, there's that quote the source uses from Marion Dickerman.
Oh, weird.
Eleanor Roosevelt was not born a great woman, she became one.
Wow. That perfectly sums up this whole journey we've been tracing, doesn't it?
It really, really does. And once she's First Lady, she just completely rewrites the job description.
Those press conferences. Only for women reporters.
Brilliant, wasn't it? Strategic. Ensured women journalists kept their jobs and had a platform in a field dominated by men.
And her newspaper column, My Day, reaching millions of people.
Yeah, with her own thoughts, unfiltered. It was this direct line to the American public that no First Lady had ever had before.
And she didn't just write from the White House, did she? The source talks a lot about her travels.
Oh, extensively. All across the country, visiting communities that were really struggling.
Coal miners, sharecroppers, people in awful housing conditions.
Yeah, she went into the tenements. She really seemed to have this genuine knack for connecting with ordinary Americans from all sorts of backgrounds, really listening to them.
And then taking their concerns right back to the president.
Directly. She was their advocate inside the White House.
Her work on racial equality, too, in such a segregated time. That took real guts.
Absolutely. The source really emphasizes that. Her protest against the DR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, when they refused to let Marian Anderson sing.
The great black contralto.
Yes. Eleanor resigning from the DR immediately and helping arrange that iconic concert at the Lincoln Memorial instead. That sent a huge message.
A massive statement.
And she consistently pushed for anti-lynching laws, advocated for black soldiers to be treated equally during the war, and built real friendships with civil rights leaders like Walter White and Mary McLeod Bethune.
Important alliances.
Yeah.
And even during World War II, with all of that going on, her advocacy didn't stop.
Not for a second. Pushing for women to have bigger roles in the war effort, fighting for European refugees who were fleeing persecution.
And those trips she took to visit the troops, even in the Pacific, that must have been dangerous.
Incredibly courageous, and apparently had a huge impact on morale. There's that quote from General MacArthur.
Oh, yeah. What did he say?
He basically said she alone accomplished more good than any other person who has passed through these war-torn areas.
Wow. From MacArthur, that's saying something.
It really is. And, the source points out her work didn't end when Franklin died. Not by a long shot.
Right. The United Nations.
Accepting that position as a UN delegate and then becoming chair of the UN Commission on Human Rights, that's arguably her most lasting global legacy.
Leading the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, that's monumental.
Truly monumental. The source mentions her incredible skill navigating all these different countries, different ideologies, to get everyone to agree on these fundamental rights.
And the standing ovation she got when it was adopted. December 1948.
Yeah, a spontaneous standing ovation just speaks volumes about her diplomacy, her sheer dedication to human dignity for everyone. You see how that childhood empathy played out on a world stage?
That's an amazing arc.
Absolutely. And she kept going, served at the UN until 52, later chaired Kennedy's Commission on the Status of Women, kept traveling the globe well into her 70s.
Still championing peace, human dignity.
Always. Tireless.
So, reflecting on this whole incredible life, the source really wraps up by emphasizing how relevant her story still is, doesn't it? Especially now, with everything so polarized and, well, cynical sometimes.
Her commitment to listening to different viewpoints, the power of principled public service, it really stands out as an example we could use today.
Definitely. And the source makes that connection, too, between her own journey from feeling insecure to becoming this incredibly self-assured figure and maybe our own struggles with self-doubt.
Yeah, it really highlights that transformative power of facing adversity head-on, acting even when you're afraid. It's a really inspiring message and pretty universal.
It really is. And that brings us to that final kind of provocative thought they leave us with. It draws on her own words, right?
Yeah.
About gaining strength and courage every time you really look fear in the face.
Yeah. And then the source turns it back to us, the listeners, encouraging us to think about, well, where do human rights begin for you? In your own life, your own neighborhood, your community.
It's a powerful challenge, really. A call to think about how we can take the lessons from her amazing journey and, actually apply them to help build a more just, more compassionate world, starting right where we are.